Okay, I'm really excited about the guest I have today, Nikki Sue Larkin. Nikki Sue and I go way back. Why don't you share a little bit, Nikki Sue, about yourself, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we know each other and get into the rest of it.
Okay, sounds great. I grew up in Idaho, southeast Idaho, and I'm actually the oldest of 9 kids. I have 8 brothers and sisters, so I grew up in a big family. I played athletics in high school, volleyball and basketball. I actually played collegiate basketball for a couple of years and had a great experience. I went on with my education to become a teacher, where it's Julie can talk about. That's where we met in college. And I got a teaching degree. I taught high school for 7 years after I graduated, coached girls basketball for those years, took a stint off from teaching to raise my daughter. And then I went back to teaching. I taught college adjunct for 9 years while also doing event planning. And I currently am a senior events manager for a company that does event planning all over the country and do events. What else can I tell you? Hobbies. I love the outdoors, hiking, being outside. I love the lake. I live 5 minutes from a lake and 8 minutes from the ski resort. So I have the best of life, winter and summer. Love to wake surf, be on the boat. Doing puzzles is something fun that I like to do. And being with my family, just hanging out with my family, kids and extended brothers and sisters and all their families. So that's a little bit about me.
That's nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
We have puzzles in common. I like doing puzzles.
I love them. We did 7 over the holidays.
Nice. That's fun. So I met Nikki Sue at BYU in Provo. I think it was it must have been 93.
Yep. That's right.
Because I came home from my mission. I served a mission in Germany. I came home in 92, had a pretty upsetting experience at BYU and went into a clinical depression. I went to stay with my parents. My parents were living in Korea at the time, which is interesting because that's where you served your mission, right?
Correct. Yep.
In Korea. I came back from Korea and I was determined that I was not going to talk to anyone. Actually, I need to go back. This was before I went to Korea. Not that that detail matters. But I was having a really, really rough summer. It was a summer term, so fewer people on campus. You take 1 or 2 classes.
Yeah.
And I was in such a deep state of depression that I was pretty convinced that my existence in the universe was a burden to about everybody I came across. So I had worked very, very hard to not interact with people. And for the summer term, that was okay. I was living in an apartment with, people that didn't know me. And I was just that weird roommate that left in the morning and came home at night and never talked to anyone. And I was sitting in this class and I think you came and sat next to me. I was all by myself.
Yeah.
Which is,
So it was a small class because it was summer term.
Right. And you came down and just plopped yourself down into my dark abyss of loneliness that I had carefully curated for myself. And you would not leave me alone.
No.
And I couldn't figure it out, but I'm so grateful that you were so persistent in becoming my friend because that friendship made such a huge difference.
Huge.
And we ended up being roommates and had a fabulous time.
We did.
And I got some help for the depression that I had been in, and so I was doing much better. But
and it's crazy how our lives intersected then, but then they intersected several years later. I mean, we've always kept in touch, but it's just that was the pattern that set for us to continue a relationship and different experiences that we've had in common.
It's really true. It's really true. We have the kind of friendship where we can
Mm-hmm.
not talk to each other for 5 or 6 months or even a
Absolutely.
year and just
Yep.
pick up as if we just saw
Yep.
each other
That's
the
right.
night before,
Mm-hmm.
which I really value that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a special kind of friendship
It,
to have.
and that's what I have come to believe of, just a kindred spirit with each other. Like, it's just that connection that we have, with people.
Yeah,
Some people, not all, but
I agree. And that's one that we had. And I truly think as we go and look at how our lives developed from that time as young adults, it seems so clear to me that the Lord's hand was in bringing us together at
sure.
that time,
Oh, absolutely.
uh, because it's not the first time
Mm-mm.
that I would say, almost in a way, we rescued each other
Yeah.
in
Oh,
different
yeah.
searches, in different
Yeah.
times in different
Yeah.
situations. So we
You talk
became
you talk
very
about
good
that
friends.
time. Yes, we did. I was searching for the same thing, though. I was so lonely in my life. I had just gotten off my mission and just had a hard winter semester, really lonely, and I think we were answering each other's prayers. We made up for it the next year.
We did. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, and we had fun roommates,
We did.
and it's
We did.
interesting from that group of roommates, most of us had an unusual
Yeah, we
second
did.
act, wouldn't you
Yeah,
say? Um,
absolutely. Every single one of them.
yeah, yeah. I got
Hmm.
married at 26,
Mm-hmm.
almost 27. How old were
I
you when
was
you got married?
29.
29. And
Mm-hmm.
and start by telling us a little bit about Cameron.
Sure.
How did you meet
My first,
Cameron?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so when I graduated from college, my whole goal in life was just to get married and have kids. I didn't want a career. I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom like my mom and raise kids and have a family. And so what my life wasn't anything, still isn't anything I thought it would be, which I think everybody can account to that. So when I graduated from college at 24, I was like, okay, it's my year. It's the next year. It's the next year. And I turned 25 and 26 and 27. And I dated, but I was very involved with my career and got a master's degree. And I coached basketball. I was very busy. And I attended a student ward, not a student ward, a singles ward in Salt Lake. And I would date, and then I would see like, yeah, there's nobody out there. So I turned 28 and I turned 29. I still wasn't married. God and I had some great conversations during those times of, hey, this is all I wanted. So I actually met Cameron in this singles ward that I was attending. And I knew who he was, but I had no interest because he was 4.5 years younger than I was. And he always came across, he was really good looking and cute, tall. He came across and all the girls in the ward loved him. You know what he was one of those kind of guys. I'm like, I don't want anything to do with him. He's a player. And he would just date girl on girl on girl on girl. In fact, like 3 weeks before we went out on our first date, he came to our apartment at 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, and I was getting ready for bed because I had to get up early in the morning. And my roommate answered the door, and he's like, is Amy here? I'm like, sure. So I went and got Amy, and I went upstairs. He stayed, watched a movie, kissed her.
Oh my gosh.
So then she was in love with him, and I'm like, I don't want this guy. Anyway, 3 weeks later, he shows up at my school and says, hey, do you want to go to lunch? I'm like, who are you? Like, just like, no big deal. And so I was like, well, I'm hungry. I have 40 minutes. Sure, let's go grab something to eat. And so we went to lunch, and he wasn't anything that I had perceived before.
Wow.
Just kindest, caring, very humble individual. And so we dated in secret for about a month and a half because my roommate was in love with him, and she would call him. And I finally had to tell her, hey, I'm dating him. And she was like, he'll break your heart. So we dated, but I laugh because, again, I go back to the things I had on my list. He wasn't any of those, of the not most important things. He hadn't had very much college. He lived at home with his parents because he had to move home for a couple months. He was younger, but those in the end didn't matter. What mattered were the true important things of a hard worker, the way he treated me, and a spiritual giant. So we dated for about 7 or 8 months and we got married. And started my dream at almost 30 of like, I'm finally married.
Right.
Yeah. Some things I loved about him, I think you had asked before, he was the most people friendly person. He could walk in, we'd laugh, he'd walk into a room, he'd come out with 3 friends. He could stand in the elevator and he had 4 best friends when he walked in. He just made everyone feel so welcome and comfortable, and he was so caring. The other fun I loved, he was so spontaneous. I'm pretty not a rigid, I'm just very organized, and I'd stick to a schedule, and he'd be like 10 o'clock, hey, let's go get ice cream. You know what I mean? Just that he was so good for me because he was spontaneous and he loved to have fun, and he lived every day to the fullest from sun up to sundown. He just went, because it's like he burned the candle at both ends. It was like he was trying to get everything in life.
Right.
And he just
sounds like such a breath of fresh air.
So fresh air.
Like you were in this stale room and then this breath of fresh air just comes in and sweeps you off your feet.
Absolutely.
Aww.
The other thing I loved is that he was never intimidated by me. Like, I had a master's degree. I made more money but everything was like, my wife is amazing. You know what I mean? Some guys would come in and go,
yes.
But he wasn't. He idolized everything I did. And that's what was just amazing about him.
And we wonderful.
We of course had a connection. Like, I had dated so many guys and it just clicked and it was just solid. Like, I knew it was right.
And you expected you were going to have babies and be together for 50 years with all your grandchildren gathered around, like what your parents have experienced, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I remember so clearly, you had called me. Our birthdays are close together, and so we would often call each other close to our birthdays and say happy birthday. And I had just had a baby. I was 30. I was just 31.
Yeah.
So you're 30, right? You get married.
Yeah.
You get pregnant.
Yeah.
Right? You're having a baby.
We were going to wait to have kids because he was going to school full time and working full time. And we had talked about, let's wait a couple years to get you through school and they'll have a baby. And he came to me about 3 months after we're married and he's like, why are we waiting? And I'm thinking, that's fine. It'll take me a while to get pregnant. And I was pregnant the next month.
Yeah.
So
with Kennedy, who we're going to hear from in another podcast, which I'm I'm excited about having these two back to back to see this perspective here from mother and daughter. But I remember it's such a vivid memory because it's one of those just aching memories of I can't remember if I called you or if you called me. Maybe I called you to say happy birthday, and I,
because it was October, right?
Yeah, October. Yeah. Hannah was born on October 10th. Your birthday's the 14th?
14th, and he died on the 16th.
And my birthday's the 17th.
Yeah.
So I call you.
Yeah.
I think I called you. Hi, how are you? I just had a baby. And I think you said, oh, you haven't heard. And that leads us into what had I not heard?
Yeah. So let me go back to this again a little bit. So we got married in June of 99. I get pregnant in November. My baby Kennedy is due, who's now 23, was due in August. So I quit teaching. We found a job where I could stay home and work, and he was going to school and working still full time. And I thought, finally, I'm almost 31 and I get to stay home and raise these kids. And so we moved a week before Kennedy was born into the storage facility that we managed. And she was born a week later in August. And then 8 weeks later, he was killed in a car accident. So we'd been married 15 months. I have an 8-week-old baby now. And I'm 31. I was 31 and a widow. And I don't think I ever met a young widow. When you heard the word widow, it was 80 years old and they had 40, 50 years together. And I honestly, at that time, I didn't know anybody whose husband had died.
Right.
And probably again, me calling you, we talk about the stages of grief, and the first one's just like shock and denial, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, wait, what? No, I waited this whole time to get married. I have a brand new baby, and what?
Right. And he's so young and
So
vibrant.
26.
And
No,
yeah.
he was 28. Sorry. 27, 20. Yeah. You're right.
Ugh.
You're right. So, again, just such I don't know, grief is just, it's so weird. It's so different. It's with everybody. And I look at my stages of grief that I went through, the classic stages, and maybe I stayed in some stages of grief longer than others. Anger was a lot that I had to deal with. I was really angry. I was angry at God because I believe in that higher power. I was angry at other couples I saw, at families I was just angry. I was so mad because all those dreams and everything I had planned on now just gone.
Right. Right. And you had done everything right.
Yeah.
You know?
And had found my soul, like this man that I had searched for so long and just connected with.
Yeah.
I think also part of grief is you have a physical pain. I was trying to describe it to my mom one day, and I said, Mom, it's emotional and mental, but it is actually a physical hurt in your whole body, especially your heart. And you hear people dying from a broken heart. I believe that is totally true.
Yes.
Because part of you is gone.
There are some memories that I can't go back to them.
Yeah.
Because it makes me feel like I'm going to vomit.
Yeah.
I stop myself.
Yeah. Yep. You're exactly right.
Not quite ready to process those.
Right.
Yet. Did you ever do any trauma counseling or grief counseling?
I did. Yeah. I've done a lot of grief counseling in different areas, anywhere from common, counseling, just talking to some other health practices of foot zoning and, other things that have really, a combination of all those have really helped me. But trauma, especially grief too, it affects so much every part of your body. You know what I mean? Just, and it's not something that just goes away either. It's traumatic.
So how did you manage that? Because I know that there was something very particular and I think special that you did that I'd like you to talk about with your widows group.
Okay.
What made you, what brought you out of this initial shock and pain?
Well, let me back up. When he died, again, I was in so much just a shock. Like it was like a cloud that I couldn't get out of. My parents drove from Idaho, and my mom stayed with me. I lived in Utah, stayed with me for a week, and this little bit, again, 8-week-old baby.
You just had a baby.
I'm still trying to figure out a mom, postpartum. You know what I mean? Just all of these things. And mad that I had to plan a funeral for my husband who was 27, just all of these things.
Yes.
And so my mom and dad said, why don't you come to Idaho and stay with us? Because it was close to Thanksgiving and the holidays. And I remember going up there, and for about 3 weeks, my mom had this orange brown chair, and I sat in that chair and I didn't move. I would get up in the morning, feed my baby, sit in the chair. My mom would bring me some lunch. And for 3 weeks. And finally, my mom came to me and she's like, Nikki Sue, I'm going to tell you this, but you have to get up. Like, you have to go. on.
Like
And
you
I needed
physically have to
that.
move out of this chair.
Physically have to move. Yeah. And it was
Are you
after
glad? Are
that
you
that I
glad that she did that? Was
absolutely, absolutely.
was it hard at the time to hear that?
I think it was hard at the time. It was hard for her to say it and see me.
Mhm.
But I remember just getting up and showering and just trying to move, about the day. And then it was like 3 days after that had happened. And I said, I need to go back to Utah. Because my parents said, why don't you just move here? Move in with us. We'll help you take care of
Mhm.
the baby. And I couldn't. There was something that was pulling me back to where I lived with him, and his family was here in Salt Lake. And I look back that was the best thing I could ever do, because it made me get out. Like you talk about what made you get out of
Yeah,
your grief. That's what it was, because I had to take care of a
yeah,
business. I had a
yeah.
baby. Um, I get really emotional because I have this 8-week-old baby, and I tell her, she's 23 now, she saved my life in so many
Mm.
ways,
Yeah,
because she didn't know any better, and she needed to be fed and played with. And she'd wake up in the morning, blue eyes, bald head, and was like, Mom, what are we going to do? You know what I mean?
yeah.
And such a blessing that she saved my life in so many ways that helped me
Mm.
keep going. I think the other thing that helped me was his family. He has 5 sisters and his mom and dad here in Salt Lake, but I helped them through their grieving process. And my sister-in-law just told me this last year, and she said, you'll never know what that did for our family, is having you close and here with this little girl, because we had just lost a son and a brother, that helped them
Elaborate on
grieve.
that. What what was it? What were they talking about? What were you doing? How did you help them with their grief?
I think Kennedy was, our daughter was a part of Cameron that they still had. Their wife, I was still his wife. I was part of his wife that they had. I had great memories with him, and we could share memories. I had only known him for 2 years, so there was so much that I didn't know about him that I needed them to tell me, to continue to tell me memories. When you're married, these things
Yes.
come up, right? When I was a little kid, I did this. And, throughout the course of your
Yes.
marriage, you find out of each other. And I never had that experience. So those were
So
ways
they
that we
helped
helped each other.
you so they helped you to
Correct.
complete this picture of who Cameron
Correct.
was, make
Yes.
him more three-dimensional.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. You're exactly right.
And then you were
And
this connection
yeah, to them.
to him
Still to
through your
this
daughter.
day, we have a great relationship. All his parents, his sisters, we've always kept that
Mm.
relationship very close.
That is really key, and that's very special because not all families do that.
No. Mm-mm.
Some
Mm-mm.
families, when there's been a death,
Yeah.
they cut off, and I don't know if it's
Right.
because it's painful for them or some
I
people
know.
just aren't as
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
oriented.
And I'll tell you this, I'm remarried, and my husband now, they call him their brother-in-law. He goes
Mm,
to all the family dinners. He's just one of the like where Cameron stepped out, he stepped in and he filled something for them. And
yes,
knowing that he takes care of Kennedy and I, and have, is something reassuring for them. So it is just a special relationship that we have.
that is very, very special.
Yeah. Yeah, it
That
is.
that seems to me like it goes beyond just their social um, interactions with the world.
Yeah.
That's got to be grounded in something more spiritual, I would think.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely, for sure. I have no doubt that Cameron had a great hand in playing all of these cards of what went together. You talked about a little bit about how I dealt with grief after. I talked about earlier, I just didn't know anybody who was young who was a widow. I knew lots who were
Right.
divorced. And I was feeling so much pain and anguish. And my sisters didn't understand. My mom didn't understand. My friends didn't understand how I felt.
Hmm.
And so I read the paper every day. And I just enjoyed reading the paper. And I noticed I started reading the obituaries. And because after my husband died, I read every book on death and grieving and the afterlife. Like that was my world.
Okay.
So I remember one day, it was a good 10 months, 11 months after he died. There was a snowmobile accident that was on the news. And it was about two young men in their late 20s that had been killed in an avalanche in snowmobile. And they had said they had both left young wives and children. And my mind, I perked up like, oh my gosh, like I know what they're going through. They're like me.
Right.
And so, sure enough, 3 days later, this obituary of this young man is in the paper. So I'm reading it. Found out he was like 29 years old, an outdoorsman, kind of the same characteristics of my husband,
Yes.
hunter,
And
avid
even that it was an
outdoorsman.
accident. So you
Yeah,
really could relate.
yeah, yeah. Left a young wife, one daughter, and the wife was pregnant with this baby when he died.
Wow.
And when I remember reading it, and I just had this urge, like, I know how she feels. Like, she needs to know, because I was searching for that there's somebody else out there that is feeling the same way that she's feeling. And I know what she's going through. So I wrote her a letter, and I just wrote a note, and I just said, hey, this is what happened to me. I'm young like you. If you ever want to talk, I would love to talk. No pressure. Gave her my name, number. And I don't even know how I mailed it. Maybe I sent it to the funeral home. I don't even know. But she got it because her dad called me about 2 weeks later and just said, hi, I'm Jenny's dad. Just want you to know that Jenny got your letter and it meant so much to her, and she'll be contacting you in the next couple weeks. So I heard from her,
Wow.
and we started to meet together, and it was so healing. She knew how I felt. I knew how
Yes.
and then just by, and I'll say the Lord's hand, we met
Mm-hmm.
other widows,
Yes.
same age, different circumstances. Sydney's husband died. He was a police officer. Somebody else, Suzette's husband, was in an accident. So the seven of us just came together, and we formed what we called the Widows Group. And we became very good friends, probably 7-8 years of just our grieving process that we went through. And that's what
That's
helped us grieve.
significant. I mean, that's significant right there on so many levels. I love
Mm-hmm.
that you took the initiative, that in your grief, you took the initiative to
Mm-hmm.
reach out to someone else who was grieving. This
Yeah.
is a very important principle
It's
in
huge.
working through grief. It, it
Yeah.
is tempting to sit at home like
Mm-hmm.
you did in that chair,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but there is healing
Mm-hmm.
available.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to initiate it,
You do.
right?
You do.
and and then that it was a 7-8 year process of you guys working through this together. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
important for people to know. It's not an overnight thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Grief is a long distance
A
journey.
long distance journey. And still we don't keep in contact like we did. Of the seven of us, four of us remarried, so life changes a little bit. But I can tell you this, Julie, it's like me and you. When we get together, we just pick up where we left off, and there's a special bond that takes
Yeah.
place. And I think we saved each other's life in so many ways. But I liked what you said about one of the great things for the healing process is to look for others who are grieving. There's something
Yes.
about reaching out to people, whether it be a death or a medical issue or job loss, something they're going through that's hard, and just being able to give of yourself, like, I'm sorry, or, you know what, I'm praying for you, or I'm here for you. It does something to your soul to help in that grieving process.
Yes. Yes. And when you're grieving, because it's such a huge disruptive life circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
you see you see the result of that friendship in such a dramatic way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's really the same principle as when you and I met in college, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We were both
Absolutely.
lonely. We were both going through
Absolutely.
something,
Yeah.
and just reaching out to another
Right.
person
Yeah.
in that circumstance ends
Right.
up enriching your life, being
Right.
such a blessing that then can carry
Right.
through to this
That's right.
more major
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. And everybody is going through something right now. Like you
Yeah,
can look around and see there's everybody going through hard things
right,
and grieving in
right.
their own ways. It doesn't have to be a death. It can be grieving of something else.
There's plenty of loss
Absolutely.
to go
For
around,
sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the questions that we had talked about before is, and we haven't really touched on this.
Hmm.
We've touched a lot on some of these areas that helped you to grieve after, but what would you identify as either circumstances or experiences or spiritual gifts that were put in place before this ever happened that helped you to withstand the
Mm.
the spiritual shock and trauma of it?
Right. Right. I would say one thing is that, I mean, I was prepared in so many ways for this experience. I was a I was prepared emotionally, mentally, I think in some ways, in that I didn't get married till I was later in life, so I was pretty independent. Like I could do things right, of if I was left on my own, which I was prepared for. I think the other thing is that the Lord prepared me spiritually of going through different hard things in my life, but developing a trust in Savior and Heavenly Father, and knowing there's a higher power in helping you through hard times, especially grief and death and loss. Doesn't make it any easier, but understanding that I had a Savior that I could yoke to for those really, really hard days that I'm like, I can't make it another day. That
Right.
knowing I had somebody that was there to help lessen that burden and lessen that grief in my life.
When you have a perspective that is that's eternal, that
Mm-hmm.
is beyond this life, then it takes the meaninglessness
Yeah,
out of
correct.
it, because one of the I think one of the deepest cuts, one of the deepest pains is when you start to tell yourself or start to believe that it was so meaningless for this to
Yeah,
happen,
right,
right?
right.
Um, that that seems just cruel,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
pain is deep enough, it's hard enough,
Right.
but
Right.
to add the belief or the feeling that this should never have happened, there was no
Right.
purpose to it,
Right.
it shouldn't have happened to me. That
Right.
just that's hard to recover from.
Right. I remember my dad telling me the day that he died, he said, Nikki Sue, from this experience, you're going to gain great blessings. And I was like, Dad, why would you tell me that the day my husband, you know what I mean?
Right.
But my dad's a very spiritual man and he doesn't say a lot, but when he says a lot, it's confound. And he just said, you're gonna experience many great blessings from this experience. And 23 years later, I absolutely attest to that. That I have gained amazing blessings in my life. And the Lord's taken care of me, and I've been taken care of. As hard as it has been, I've been taken care of and blessed in my life.
What are two or three of the main things that stand out to you as far as the blessings? So that might be hard for somebody to hear, just like it was hard to hear that from your dad.
Well, I just look at the circumstances when my husband died. I was in a situation where I lived at home, like I was able to stay in my place and work. I didn't have to go back and get a job. I had been set up that way to continue that life of what I needed, financially and spiritually. I was so supported by my family and his family. It's interesting that the area that we lived in Salt Lake was pretty scary. It was in a scary neighborhood. We had bars on our windows, in a scary neighborhood, and I never felt unsafe. I lived there for three and
Mm.
a half years after he died, And I remember one day my sister-in-law drove up, and it was at night, probably a year after he died. And she said, Nikki Sue, there's like angels around here. Like there is some protection around here that you can feel. And I felt the same way all the time.
Wow.
Another is I've just, I've been blessed physically. I've been blessed mentally, spiritually. I've been greatly blessed with my second marriage of an amazing man that is taking care of us in so many ways. Granted, if we had time, we can do a second podcast about blending families and second marriages. That is not easy by any means, but I've been blessed. I've been
And
taken
even
care
the
of.
way that shapes you,
Oh,
molds you into a more
absolutely.
compassionate
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So what I hear you saying is that going through this experience has molded you into a person that maybe more recognizes the Lord's hand in your
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely. And this did not come overnight. This has come through a lot of study, a lot of therapy, a lot of prayer, a lot of different experience, a lot of serving others and valuing relationships. And it's just been it's been a journey. Still is a journey, but
Right.
it's a journey.
Okay. So speaking of things people say at weird times.
That's why I loved our widow group. Like we would meet once or twice a month, go to dinner. We've been to Hawaii together. We've been to Jacksonville. We went on all these trips together, and we would always laugh. Like you guys will never guess what I got today. Never guess what I heard.
Okay, you got to
Um,
share a few of those. You got to share the most
um,
cringy ones.
well, I remember at the viewing, it was an older woman. She comes and she says, "Don't worry, honey. You're young. You'll get married again."
Somebody said something like that to me, standing in my driveway. My husband had been dead a week. Don't worry, you'll get married again. That's what you're thinking. That's the last thing you're thinking. So please don't say to
No,
people,
don't say that.
they're not trying to replace what they've lost. They're trying to
No,
work through and mourn
no,
this
no.
important person.
I hated people would say, he must be needed more on the other side. He has a greater work to do. Are we just like garbage? Like we don't mean anything here?
Especially with a brand new baby.
Yeah, he didn't have a great work here. Like, no, that's not. I don't agree with you there. And some people just ignored you because they didn't know what to say. I remember seeing a neighbor in the grocery store and she looked at me, she saw me, and she walked away. I mean, it was very recent after he had died because they
Right,
just don't know what to say.
right.
And so they just ignore you of what you say. I was always very open. Like I didn't mind talking about how he died. In fact, it was therapy for me to talk about the accident and the
Mm-hmm.
instances surrounding it. And I love just to talk about him. But
Yes,
people they just don't know what to say. And so they'll be like, well, can you tell me about the accident? Well, I'm glad you asked. You know what I mean? But
right,
they were afraid I would break down and start bawling. And
right,
that wasn't me. I
right.
wanted to talk about it. That was what I needed.
So, so if you don't know what to say, that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Nothing a
Absolutely.
person can say is going
Mm-mm.
to either erase your grief or,
Mm-mm.
and if you fall apart, that's okay too,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
Yeah, except
I
for
think,
saying things like, don't worry, Missy, you're young,
yeah,
you got good
yeah.
hips, somebody will want you.
You'll have more babies.
That's right.
I just learned all you have to say. And I really do think you need to say something to acknowledge because they're grieving.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm so sorry. I've been thinking about you and praying it for you. That's all you have to say. I'm sorry for your loss.
You know, a question that I have found helpful is, how are you managing today?
Mm.
How are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
managing your grief? Which is different than how you doing,
Yeah. That's so great.
because usually how you're doing is kind of sucky.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how are you managing today?
I love that.
Uh, yeah, yeah, that,
Because Julie, that for me, I had planned my whole life with this man. So to think about, I had to live my whole life without this man, it was overwhelming. And it was like a panic attack. And it put you in deeper in depression. I remember everyone says, oh, the first year is hard. First year is not hard. Second year is hard. You make it through the first year and you're like, okay, I'm going to make it. And then you get to the first year and you're like, I got to do this all over again. Another year.
yeah, yeah, nothing has changed.
Nothing changed. Yeah. So just like you said, for me, it was taking one day at a time. I'm not going to think about a year. I'm not going to think about 5 years down the road. I'm going to take one day at a time and something I could look forward to tomorrow or just one day at a time. So I like what you said is, how are you doing today?
Yeah.
Because how you're feeling today could be different tomorrow and different from 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago.
I feel like I was fortunate because Steve had been widowed. A lot of these lessons were things he shared
Mm,
with me
yeah.
as we courted and
Yeah.
married.
Yeah.
So it was, I learned
Yeah.
some of those things
Right.
because he'd
Right.
been
That's
through it.
great.
So how have you changed as a person from the girl you were at 29? And I know and it's been
Yeah.
several years. You and Bruce have been married for a long time. You've had a whole
Yeah.
lifetime with him.
Right.
But how have you changed
Um,
because of that experience?
yeah, I've changed a couple ways of viewing life. I really look at what matters in life. We get so caught up in the things that don't matter. My first husband, was a professional golfer, and he had 5 different sets of clubs in the garage that anywhere valued from $3,000 to $10,000. He died. He left in the garage. He had nice fishing poles and rifles and all of this stuff. It didn't matter. And how it changed me is how I view relationships. And that is what really matters in our life, and how we treat people, especially those close to us, other spouses and kids and our parents. Relationships are really what matter in this life. And just reaching out to other people, I've really learned that really matters, and serving other people, and just being mindfulness, and present in everyday situations.
Well, and it's interesting to hear you say that because I would have described all of those things in you from the person I knew before
Interesting.
Cameron passed away. But do you think it, you experience it at a deeper level? Are you more
Absolutely.
aware?
No,
What?
more aware, heightened awareness. And knowing this, that it could be gone in a second, because it was for me. Having him die was never even so unexpected. Again, if they're sick or they're old, you expect it. But because it isn't expected, and I still have triggers when my current husband doesn't call me, you know what I mean? Or my
Yes.
kids don't let me know where they are. Those are triggers that start to trigger in me, because that's what happened, with my first husband. But yeah, it deepened all of those aspects.
I want to talk a little bit about the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
what are the triggers, and have you learned to manage them, or do they just come
Mm-hmm.
up out of nowhere and you can't control it?
Both. As you know, grief comes and goes, and all those stages come and go. I don't. They never dissipate. They don't come as often, though. As time goes on. I don't know about you, Julie, but one of my fears was I would lose memories,
Mm,
because as time goes on, and I just remember being in a panic for the first 9-10 months, like, oh my gosh, I forgot this and this. And I journaled and I did scrapbooks and I wrote down everything I could remember about him, because I knew as time went on that those memories would fade. And that was a big worry. Does that make sense? Fear
yes,
and
actually,
worry.
That is that is so great that you did that because you
I
had
did.
Kennedy. How has
Yep.
that affected her that
So
she can read and see
yeah.
these?
So again, when she died, I'm thinking when he died, excuse me, I have this 8-week old baby who will never know what an amazing father she has, right? And for me, that was another grieving that I had to go through. Not only the loss of my husband, but the loss that this daughter would never know her father. So that was another other motivation for me to write memories. So I remember at the funeral, I think my sister did it, and she had a piece of paper that people could write friends, family, any memory of him that was able to be shared with her.
Yes.
And I went back and did scrapbook of his pictures and our time together and journal and notes. But she's told me now that she's 23, that's how she's got to know her dad. There's no
Yeah,
other way that she gets to know him other than what people tell her about him.
right.
But I know that was great therapy for me and great help me with the grieving process of being able to do that because the memories fade and you know that too. You know what I mean? Just
Yes.
so I would just challenge anyone if they're going through that to just write all that you can remember and it will also help you. And I'm grateful to go back and look at that because that heals that ache that we have.
Right. Well, again, it fills in this person
Yeah.
to make them three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
memories can be a little
Yeah.
two-dimensional, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least when they're in your mind, but when you can
Yeah.
actually
Right.
take them
Right.
out, um, a lot of times I'll get just a flash of something and I'll pull
Yeah.
my phone out. I
Yeah.
have I have a Steve folder in my notes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'll
It's
just,
great.
I'll just write something. For a long time I would just, text myself,
Right.
but at least I would have it
Right.
and
Right. Just a little bit more on triggers. For me, my triggers are the fall season because that's when he died. My birthday, because he died 2 days after my birthday. So I kind of gear up like, oh, I remember the smells, right? You remember the smells of fall and the leaves
Mhm.
and just knowing that that was a really, really hard time and giving yourself allowance to just grieve for a minute. It's okay that we can do that. We don't have to go push it away. It's okay that we can feel those things.
Right. Even though it's been a year or 5 years or 10 years or 15
Absolutely.
years, because
Absolutely.
it's been 23
23.
years
Yeah. 23
and
years.
you still have flashes
Still.
where you grieve.
Yeah. Yeah. This happened to me 2 months ago. I walked into a sporting goods store and there was a guy that came around the corner and he had the same stature as Cameron. And for a minute, I was just like, oh my God. And it's just funny
Yeah.
how those triggers are like, that come,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. And then you go through the stages of grief again.
Yeah.
Shock, anger, you know what I mean? It just puts you
Yes.
through. But again, I've learned that it's okay. I'm just gonna feel it and go through it.
Well, and
Um,
I think that there's value even in
yeah,
that because
right.
when you feel the shock again or the anger
Yeah,
again, it helps you to stay connected to someone who is feeling that now,
that's right. That's
right? If you
exactly right.
can't if you
Sure.
can't access that,
Yeah,
it's more difficult to be there for someone who
right.
is experiencing that
Right.
acutely.
Right. Yeah. For me, when Kennedy, just her seasons of accomplishment, high school graduation, college graduation, that first job, those big monuments, monumental moments in her life, it's, you go through that grief of knowing, wait, you're supposed to be sharing these great accomplishment times with me. And then you
Right.
go through again the stages of grief of Father's Day's hard sometimes, just all those.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
don't know about you, Julie, but when you see your kids grieve, you kind of go back into that also.
Yes. Yes. How has that been for you as the mom to Kennedy? When have you seen her grief manifest? And what do you do about that as a mom?
Yeah, I would say for her, it's again, I mean, I've been remarried now 20 years. All she's known is, her stepdad now, but she has a spiritual connection with her dad. They
Really?
are connected absolutely. We don't have time, but there's been different experiences when she was little that
We have
she
time.
had she had with her dad. I know she's played with him several times. I know they've had
Oh,
conversations when they were little. So she's a connected. Father's Day's hard for her. Again, days of, seasons of accomplishment for her are hard. And me dealing with, we just talk about it. Like,
yeah,
hey, what are you feeling right now? I know it's hard. And yeah, life stinks that you didn't get to know your dad on the earth, right?
right,
And just acknowledging that, yeah, it's not fair. And one of the things that's been a struggle for me is, again, I go back that's why these memories have been so vital for her. Is I only knew him for 2 years. So I don't have a lot of experiences to share with her because we weren't together very long.
right.
So she loves to go hang out with his mom and dad and his sisters because they just can tell story when he was little and all these other story. And it just fills her and his friends that helps her get to know who he was and help her
Have
in her grieving process.
Does she remember any of these experiences of
Mm-mm.
playing with him or
No,
talking to him? She was
no,
just
she
too
doesn't.
little, huh?
Too little, way too
But
little.
you were able to
Oh, I remember one
witness
time I'm
that.
sitting in the family room, living room. She talked when she was really young. She was very intellectual, and I could hear her in there just talking to someone, and I just froze, and I'm like, "It's him. I'm not going to move. I'm just going to sit here." And she was just playing with her toys, and I have no doubt that it was there.
Yeah, that is
You know,
really special, and
it is.
that's something that I would hope would give some hope to people who wonder if our loved ones who passed
It is.
have any connection to us. I
Yeah,
know they do. I've
absolutely.
had such specific
Such.
experiences with
Yeah.
and their personalities don't change.
Nope. None. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I'll be driving in the car and I'm like, when she was a teenager, or even now, like, hey, I need some help, Cameron. We need to talk about, like, give me some guidance, or getting mad, like, you left me here to do this by myself.
That's right.
Even though my current husband is a great support, but you know what I mean? It's just different, but
Yeah.
they're there. They're there when you need them. They're there as angels, I believe, for your kids and for you when you need them to be there.
Oh,
It doesn't
I,
change.
yeah,
The personality
yeah,
is the same. And just to get a little spiritual, is that they ache for us, I believe, the same that we ache for them. That didn't change.
I agree.
Just the sphere changed. That it was
Right.
just as hard for them to leave as it was for us to have them leave us.
I think you're right. Yeah, I agree with you.
And they maybe go for their own grieving process. I don't know. Of
They have a different
right,
perspective, but
right.
it's still a separation,
It is. It
right?
is. Right. Right.
Right? And if a person didn't mean so much, then it wouldn't be so hard to be separated.
I heard that somebody said a quote the other day that said, that's why it hurts so hard when a loved one dies, is because there's so much love. And if you didn't love them, it wouldn't hurt.
Right. And I think that is a reflection that the of the love that God has for us
Yes,
as his children.
absolutely.
You know, we're here on the earth to learn how to love like God
Yeah,
loves,
that's absolutely. And
right?
that's what, again, has changed my perspective of going through this experience, is how to love people.
So you talked about you read everything you could get your hands on,
I did, yeah.
and I'd love to get a list of some of those. If you can send me a list, I'd love to put it up on the website.
Yeah.
Some of your
And these are
favorites.
spiritual books. These are
Hmm.
non, non-spiritual,
Hmm.
all
Yeah,
facets.
self help, anything.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, one of the books I loved, uh, really was helpful for me was A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. I
Mm,
don't know if you read that
mm-mm,
one.
mm-mm, mm-hmm.
Um, and then there was another book called The Message. The
Yeah,
reason that one resonated so
I
much with
love
me
it.
is because Lance Richardson,
Yeah,
who wrote the book, who was the
right.
subject of
Yeah,
the experience, was Steve's childhood friend,
I
lived
remember you
down the
telling me
street
that.
from him.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so it was, so
I love that. Yeah.
yeah,
Any
yeah,
afterlife. Gateway to Death was another one that just talked about just after death and that it's really a graduation. We just graduated, right? We get to
right,
move on to the
right.
next phase. Yeah.
But when you get married to someone, you expect you're going to be graduating closer
Yeah.
together,
I know. You're
not so far
exactly
apart.
right. Exactly right. I read, of course, the scriptures, lots of things of um, just talking about, thine afflictions will be but a small moment. And if thou endure it well, thou shalt exalt thee on high. In that same section, the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about thy friends do stand by thee, shall hail thee again. That was lots of comfort that I needed.
Right.
Um, and just
Well, I
after,
know you were one of the people I reached out to after
mm-hmm,
Steve passed away because I knew you could relate to how it felt
yeah,
to lose your husband.
yeah, right,
And and I'm so, so grateful. I was very great. I remember sitting down and talking to you and Bruce
mm-hmm,
together, and just knowing that somebody could have what looks like a normal functioning happy life
mm-hmm,
after this
after,
kind of tragedy
yeah,
was very hopeful for me.
yeah. And Julie, I'll comment to that. That's the other thing I looked for a lot was, tell me I'm going to be okay. Show me someone who's gone through this whittle thing and have turned out okay, right? That I'm not going to feel this way, this hurt for so long. And I met two or three women. One had been remarried, two weren't, kind of time, but they were like, you're going to be okay. Like, you're going to get through this. It's going to be really hard, but you're going to get through this. And that was comfort to me that I needed,
Right, right.
that assurance.
So thankful that people will share their experiences like you are right now. So,
It helps me like to heal, to share experiences. I love to talk about it. I love to talk about my journey because again, it helps me grieve.
that's
Part of the
good to
grieving
know.
process,
And maybe it's helpful for people who are helping someone else to grieve to remember we want to talk about it.
right?
We want to talk about the person
Yeah,
we lost. We want to we want to know that that you care.
yeah,
That
that
you know,
absolutely.
yeah.
Because as you maybe saw this, that was the other thing that was so hard. I noticed after he died that the world goes on and everybody goes back to their normal life.
Oh,
And
the
my life
weirdest
is
thing is
not,
going to the grocery store, right?
yeah.
You're pushing your cart around looking at
Yeah,
vegetables saying, "This I what how can I be in this situation looking at zucchini
yeah,
when I just had a funeral?"
yeah, yeah. And I would get so mad because everyone went back to their normal life and mine wasn't normal. And I'll have people say, what can I do for my friend or my sister, her husband, or, whatever. And I'll say, you give it 2 or 3 months. And then that's when you start reaching out. I
That's right.
said, the first month, you've got so much support. And then everyone leaves and everyone goes back to their normal life. And it's like you're forgotten. And that's when they need the most support. And that's when they're grieving the hardest.
Right. And feeling them, and that's when you come in and show
Absolutely.
that they're not forgotten.
Absolutely. Like I still remember, I know you're still in pain because you're still in pain, right? And they don't
Right.
have as much pain, but I know you still are. And so I'm still remembering you,
That's
still
so
thinking about you,
interesting.
still praying for
That's
you.
that's interesting that you say that. I think you said for verbatim what Steve said so many times as
Yeah.
we would, you know, lose a friend or someone,
Yeah.
he'd say, just wait
Yeah.
3 months. That's
That's
when they're
right.
really, really going to need the support. And he would remember and
Absolutely.
he would
Yeah, I know.
reach out and
Yeah.
yeah.
And it means a lot even towards that death anniversary or their birthday that somebody just remembers. Hey, I remember it's Cam's birthday, and his birthday was a day after Kennedy's birthday. So that's again another trigger
Wow.
that, sometimes,
Wow.
and just like, hey, I'm just thinking about you guys today.
I put I put I put reminders in my calendar
Mm-hmm.
because there's no way I can remember
Nope.
all of
Nope.
these things. But
So good.
but that's a little practical tip. Put a little note in the
Yeah,
calendar.
put a note in the calendar. Just I know anybody that's going through this would love to just have somebody remembers me, right? They haven't
Hmm.
forgotten me.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
really, really important.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything
Mm.
else that you had been thinking about as we were leading up to this that you wanted to share?
I think one of the things you and I had talked about is kind of an overview of your podcast is what does it mean to grieve well? I've been
That
thinking
was
about
going to be
that a
my
lot.
next question. What do you think it
Yeah.
means to grieve well?
I'm like, grieving and well in the same sentence is an oxymoron here. But I just think grieving well is allowing yourself time to go through the grieving process. There's not a timetable. There's not a, a how to. I mean, there's different sex suggestions and tips, and everyone grieves differently. But letting yourself feel those things, um, and setting your own pace to what you're dealing, but being able to get the support that you need of whatever that looks like, of resources, of counseling, or support groups, or an outlet that you have that you need for self-expression, books or any of that kind of thing to help you progress. It's one thing when you get stuck, right? Then and
Right.
you're in that grief, but being able to go through those, and understand your complicated grief emotions, and knowing that you think you're through, and then you go back again
Right.
with things that trigger. um
So being gracious to yourself, allowing
exactly.
yourself to go through the process,
Yeah.
surrounding yourself with resources.
Yeah. And finding those people, I would say even people, because we need people who bring you light and upliftment and encouragement,
Right.
because you can't do this by yourself. And the other thing is that higher power of God and,
Right.
and Jesus Christ. You have to have them, I believe, to get through this. That's helped me grieve well,
Right.
um, as well as the other things. But
Right.
that's what I would say. And I'm going to say I'm grateful for this experience that I've had to grieve, because I'm a different person and I wouldn't be who I was today had I not been through this experience, as hard as has been. Um, but I am.
I'm grateful that you feel that way because I know that day when I heard that you had this
Mm-hmm.
little baby, your
Mm-hmm.
husband had passed away, you were so young, with so much ahead of you. It it would have been hard to anticipate this moment today where you
Oh,
can confidently
absolutely.
say that you made it through
Yeah.
and you are a better person and you're
Right.
even grateful for the person you've become.
Right. I
I
am.
think that's quite a miracle.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that I'm all the way through. There are still moments
Right.
I go back, right? But yeah, I've just learned a lot of things.
Well, I don't think it's something that you ever button up and put away
Oh,
because this
absolutely
is a
not.
person we're talking about, right? It's
Absolutely.
not an
Absolutely.
expendable resource that
No.
you say, okay, that was great. That was great meal. I loved it.
Yeah.
Now I'm on to the next thing. This is a person. This is a
And
permanent place in your heart.
that's what I wanted to say. It's a permanent place. It doesn't ever go away. The love doesn't go away. The memories don't go away. The caring and the longing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still there and it's still part of you.
Right.
But it's learning to grieve well of what that looks like.
Well,
So,
and the hope
yes,
and the anticipation and the joy that there will be a reunion,
absolutely.
that comes, I think, and fills that empty space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Eventually.
So
At first,
yeah.
it's pretty raw, but that can grow into that space
Right.
where the person that you love was
Right.
occupying.
Yeah. And even anybody that's listening that maybe be listening because their sister or their daughter or their brother's lost someone and knowing, what do I do? They just need you to care and just be and listen.
Right. Yeah, we're not
And
meant
be
to be
patient.
solo journey. We're not meant to
No.
be on this solo journey of
No, not
life.
at all. That's why we're here together.
Right. Right. I know for me back in college, it was miserable, and it was a lot of work to try to avoid having any contact with people.
I know. It
You
is.
know,
But you're so likable, Julie. I don't know how people could not be
I'm
attracted to you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that that was a temporary experience.
Yeah,
Life is
me too.
much better surrounded by friends and
Absolutely.
family and people that love you and that
Right.
you can love.
Yeah. So true.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure. It's been so great.
Oh,
I'm so happy that you're doing this. You're going to help a lot of people.
well, I sure hope so. You've helped me a lot, so I'm
Mm,
very, very eager for others to learn from what you have experienced, the wisdom you've gained.
thanks.
You're a great person, Nikki Sue.
You are too.
So great. So
Thanks,
glad that
Julie.
we met all those years ago. And
I know. This is a great talk. Let's do it again.
let's do it. Let's talk again. I don't know, in 7 months and 4 days.
Awesome.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks
All
again.
right. Bye. Bye.
Bye.